Like this stuff is
hmm
so good. And so I'm like, okay, I'll write a book as if it'd be really easy. Not easy. Okay. Not easy.
Благослови моих братьев, благослови наши руки. Мы в поисках больших денег, мы в деле круглые сутки. Благослови
Pimped Out Radio Show, man. They everywhere.
благослови моих братьев. All right, y'all, we're tuning in for another episode of Banked Out Radio Show. I'm your host, Andreas, and coming via Zoom, we have Jenn Drummond, who is a motivational keynote speaker, world record holder, author, podcast host, mom of 7. It seems like many, many more talents. I'm sure you have many more talents. But Jen, thank you for coming on.
Hey,
Um,
thanks for having me.
you're welcome. One, I loved your bio. One being able to get over the car accident that you was in. One, I'm
Yeah.
sure that was very devastating. So let's get into that real quick. Walk us through that process of like healing and being able to overcome something that traumatic.
Yeah. It's not a one-time decision. It's a lot of decisions made multiple times, multiple days to just kind of process and get through it. I was lucky that even though the car was crushed into a tiny tin can, it was okay.
Mhm.
I actually got released from the hospital the same day. I went home. The next day, I was like, okay, I'm going to need to get a car. So I took an Uber to the dealership and I met with them and I'm like, hey, what do we have available? And somebody had built his wife a car and she didn't like it. So it was available. So I'm like, that's perfect. I'll take it. And so they gave me the keys
Mhm.
and I went to get it. I got in the car and I was like, oh, I have to drive again. I'm not ready to drive. Like, I'm scared to drive right now. So I sat in the parking lot of that dealership for 45 minutes, having a
Mhm.
conversation with myself, like, I can do it. Listen to pump up music, call a friend, like all the things.
Mhm.
And finally, I realized if I don't do it, it's just going to get bigger and harder. So I
Yeah.
have to just do it uncomfortable. So I pulled out into the road. I swear I drove home with my heart in my throat like the entire
Mhm.
way. Anytime I got near a semi, my heart started racing and I had to get as far over as possible. But I made it home. Right. And that was like one example. That was one day that I made it home and I was okay. And it probably took 6 to 9 months of me
Mhm.
driving on the highway, feeling anxious, not feeling myself. Before one day I was driving my mom to the airport and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm normal. It's back to the way it was. Like, I don't know when this happened, but here we are. And I think when traumatic things happen to us, just having the grace to allow it to not look like it did before for a while.
Mhm. I definitely understand that. I'm so glad you was able to overcome that. So then at what point are you challenged by, I believe it's one of your kids to be able
Done.
to go and start mountain climbing?
Yes. So here's crazy. Like life's crazy. Life's crazy when you let it be crazy. So
Right.
I survived this accident that they could
Mhm.
not build a scenario where I lived. And
Mhm.
then I like 2019 was the next year. And I just remember 2019 being a big year of like, who is Jenn Drummond? What do I
Mhm.
want to do in this life? What do I want to experience? What do I want for myself? Because I don't get to choose when I die, but I sure get to choose how I live. How do
Mhm.
I want to live? And I had this huge list. It probably took me 4 lifetimes to complete it all, but this big list of things that I wanted to do, see, experience, and become.
Mhm.
In 2020, I was turning 40. So when I looked at my list, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to climb a mountain because that was on my list. And I figured the older I got, the harder it would be to do it. So better to
Mhm.
do it while I'm young. And
Mhm.
I was training for a mountain named Ama de Blam. If you've
Mhm.
seen Airmont Pictures like movie, you've seen the mountain because it's in their logo. The stars go around it.
Mhm. Okay.
And then all of a sudden, COVID happens. And so
Mhm.
I'm a homeschool teacher and I'm not flying anywhere because we can't, right? Like the world
Mhm.
shut down. And one of my kids was struggling with his math homework. So I'm like, listen, buddy, we do hard things. And he goes, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? said, honey, it's Ama de Blom, not I'm a dumb blonde, but thank you. We'll look at Everest when you're done with your homework. So he finished his homework. We looked at Everest. He went to bed. I was still looking at Everest. I'm like, you know what? Why not climb Mount Everest? If he thinks it's the hardest mountain in the whole world, I'm going to climb it and show him that whatever Everest is, we can summit. And so I call a coach. He gets me ready for Everest, and he has me read this book about becoming an uphill athlete. And in the front of this book was a story about a lady who got a Guinness World Record for doing something in the Alps. And I just remember telling my coach, like, I could have done that. Like, I could suffer. And if I got a Guinness World Record, my kids would think I'm cool. And my coach is like, okay, well, I'll think of something. And a few weeks later, he called me back and he's like, hey, Jen, I have the perfect record for you. You should be the first female to climb the 7-second summits. I'm like, what? It sounds like a tongue twister. What did you say? And he goes, listen, he goes, the 7-second summits are the second highest point on each continent. They have not been done by a female before. They've only been done by one male. It's harder than the first 7. And you would like, think about it. 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 children. Sounds like a jackpot. Like, hey, it does. Let's do it. And so I said, yes. I hadn't slept in a tent before, but you know, those are details.
Yeah. But I love the fact that you able to challenge yourself and do that. How did the kids react to, once you started getting going and was it like, oh my goodness, am I really out here doing this?
I know, right? So of course I talked to my kids about it beforehand and they were like, yeah, mom, get a record, get a world record. That'd be cool. We have no clue what's involved, which is a lot more than what we ever thought was going to be involved, but that's okay. And we, it was an adjustment for all of us. I hadn't been gone that long before. I probably struggled with it more than they did, just because everybody at home knew what I was doing and they were supporting me and things like that. Now, luckily, technology's changed. So I could call from base camp, a lot of times Zoom call and FaceTime. When we were on the mountain, you didn't have Wi-Fi, but I could still send text message on my Garmin. So it was hard, but I think we're all better for it.
What's up? So after you do this venture and you're able to set that record, is that what inspires the book or?
Yeah, the book. Okay. If anybody tells you to write a book, ask more questions. So I'm halfway through this journey.
I love it. I love it.
I'm serious though. I'm halfway through this journey and I go out to lunch with a friend who happens to be an author. Okay. So like, this is his wheelhouse. It'd be like him going on a hike with me and like, let's climb Everest. He's saying, yes. So anyways, so we're eating lunch and I'm walking through like everything that's been going on so far. And he's like, you need to write a book.
Money walk, money talk, pockets up front like crisscross, in and out fast like quick stop. Look at my wrist like off. Call a chauffeur for the pit stop. Haters can't stop me, I don't lift off. You can listen around and get off, and I ain't never ever getting ripped off. Y'all really ain't talking about nothing. Y'all really ain't talking about nothing. Go get you a bag of something. Team up with your bag on something. I'm on go this summer. Whatever you want, it's the same thing. Get with the groove, giving them game. I'm playing change. I don't know nothing. I ain't seen nothing. I don't know, but you a fan or something. Real G's moving silent. Got it down to a science. Gotta stay 10 steps ahead of these haters because they trying to get me out balance.
Look, I don't even like mountaineering and this is amazing. Like this stuff is so good. And so I'm like, okay, I'll write a book as if it'd be really easy. Not easy. Okay. Not easy. I wrote the book. I take the reader on each expedition that I was on. And I highlight a particular lesson in that particular expedition that they can apply to their own lives. So when they're trying to climb their mountains, probably metaphorical, maybe physical, they have the skills to get through obstacles that might come their way. So I've built a business. I've climbed all these mountains. There's a whole bunch of parallels that go between the two of them. And this book takes you on the journey of how to apply these principles to your life. I named it Break Proof, 7 strategies to build resilience and achieve your life goals. And the reason why break proof is we're going to break. When we're pushing our limits and we're trying to figure out where our edges are, we're going to go over them. And when we break, there's the proof of what's going well, what we need to improve, what do we know now to be able to continue to go forward? Is this even the mountain we want to climb, or do we want to climb a different one? And so it's in the breaks that we have the proof of what we need to continue to climb.
So, given the fact that you climbed mountains and started a business, which one do you feel is more difficult to do?
I don't know. Like they each have their moments, right? Like I would say the business is more difficult, but then all of a sudden I've been in some situations where it's been life or death. And I'm
Mhm,
in those moments and I'm like, why am I doing this?
mhm,
Why couldn't I pick beaches? Why did I have to pick mountains? Like, what's my problem?
mhm.
So I think both of them have those moments of what did I say yes to and why am I here right now?
I definitely get that. What's been something that was surprising to you in doing both ventures?
Um, let's see here. For mountaineering, like when you start it,
Mhm,
I had no clue what I was getting into. And I thought it was going to take forever. And then all of a sudden, I had 2 mountains left. And then I had 1 mountain left. And then that mountain was done. And I was sad. I
mhm,
wasn't expecting to be sad when the experience was done. I don't know if we talk about that enough, where you have this pursuit that's taking all your energy and all your time, and it gives you a ton of purpose and passion and all these things. And when it's
mhm,
done, you're like, oh, what do I do
mhm,
now? Like, what does this mean? Right.
mhm,
So I think like when we set goals and we reach them, just to understand like, hey, there might be a point a little bit afterwards that you're kind of sad. Not that you did it, but just that it's done and you'll have to come up with something new to keep you excited. So that was something I learned in mountaineering.
mhm,
Um, in business, I think I did things backwards.
mhm,
That movie, if you build it, like Field of Dreams,
mhm. Feel
and it was
dreams
like, if you
they
build
will
it, they will
come.
come.
Mhm,
Yeah, right. And that's not how business works. Okay.
mhm.
Just because you build a website does not mean people will come. Just because
Yes.
you put your sign on a building does not mean people will come. And
Mhm,
so the reality is in business, you need to really pay attention to who your people are, what your community is, what their needs are. And then once that need shows up, then solve the problem,
mhm.
not build it and then hope the problem is what you're trying to solve. Like, I think that was a big lesson in business I had.
So I imagine your business is you, correct? Like the brand of you and everything you were doing.
I'm sorry.
Your business, is it you? Are you the business that you're referring to?
Yeah. So I have a couple businesses, right? Because anybody
Okay.
who's in business gets addicted and they have more than one. Because why would
Yeah.
we want one thing that gives us headaches? We
Yeah,
want
exactly.
multiple things. Yeah. So my first business is in the financial service sector. So it
Okay.
was the financial planning company. I hired myself out of a job. I still own the company. I just don't actively work in it because I have amazing people that do amazing things that
Mhm,
I do not participate in. And then so that gave me free time to be home with the kids. That got boring
mhm,
because they went to school and had things going on. So now I'm doing like speaking and some retreats, and I do like private like coaching with people. And
mhm.
that business I love because I just love the mindset piece. Like I love the embodiment of the things.
So when you was doing the financial business and getting that going, was that your like first business or
I mean, I
how
had a
was
lemonade stand as a child. Let's not undercut the lemonade stand, but
hey,
yes, it
hey, things like that. I used to sell candy when I was little too, so I definitely get where you coming from. How was
yes.
the reception when you like jumped into the industry? Did the people receive you like they were supposed to, or how you anticipated?
Okay, so my start in the financial service sector is a start that I wish upon no human anywhere in this world. So even
Hmm.
if you're my biggest enemy, I don't even want you
Hmm.
to have this experience.
Hmm.
So here's what happened. I am in college and I do an internship for a company that could not hire enough temporary labor to manufacture this chair that everybody in the world all of a sudden wanted, I guess. And so I helped like manage the temporary labor. Well, then Y2K happened, and then this company didn't want any more temporary labor. So these people that we had been begging to come into work and
Hmm.
begging to skip weekends and begging to work longer, all of a sudden, like almost overnight, we had to
Mhm.
tell, like, guess what? We don't need you anymore. You don't have a job. And they, like 200 of them. And they were like sad and crying and tried to begging with us. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible situation to be in. I never want to work for somebody because I don't know how I could give it my all and then have them be, see you later. So
Mhm.
that's like, I knew I had to do something independent. A friend of mine graduated a year of college ahead of me, and he took a job at this financial company. And he told me, he's like, Jen, you would love it. And you're expensive. So this is going to be a great job for you because
Mhm.
you like expensive things. I'm like, okay, fine. So he's like, they'll take you now. I'm like, okay. So I go to the school register. I'm like, hey, how do I get out of here? I've got a job. And he's like, yeah, you just need to take like these 2 courses on the side and you should be fine. I'm like, okay, perfect. I go to my parents. I'm like, hey, I got this job. I'm going to get out of college early. My parents are like, okay, but listen, if you take that job, you have to work it for a year, no matter what, because otherwise you're going to be young and you're not going to look like you can hold down a job. And
Mhm.
so you can graduate, but you have to stay where you're going for a year. I'm like,
Mhm.
fine, I'll do that. What am I worried about? So I do that. I go to my first day on the job. I'm like,
Mhm.
hi, I'm Jen. I'm the new financial advisor. Nice to meet you. And the lady's like, oh, hey, Jen. Nice to meet you. See that desk over there with a telephone and a phone book? That's you. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not call center. I'm financial advisor. And she goes, sweetheart, it's the same thing till you build your book of business.
Mhm.
I was like, what? So I had a cold call,
Mhm.
like phone book cold call, hours upon hours a day to build my book of business. I had never heard the word no so many times in my life. Like the
Mhm.
first 3 weeks, I went home crying every day. Like, who does this? Why would someone do this job? This is horrible. I don't even like it. I want to quit. I couldn't quit because my parents would kill me. And
Mhm.
I had a fear of my parents. So, like, I was not calling them. So I
Yeah.
called the school. Okay. And I'm like, hey, this is Jen, just graduated. Kidding. I want to come back. What else can I do? They're like, Jen, you're graduated. You would have to reapply and re-register and all this kind of stuff. Like, you can't just, you could, if you want to look at next semester, you can. But right now, like, here's where you're at. I'm like, oh my God, I have to work at this stupid job for a year because that's what I committed to. And
Mhm.
there's actually a beauty to that because once you commit to the commitment, then now you're not like trying to figure out ways to get out of it, right? Now
Mhm.
you're just figuring out ways to like make it less painful and maybe even enjoyable or whatever. And so I ended up buying one of those little guns that has the foam ball at the end. So when
Mhm.
someone said no to me on the phone, I shot them. And then the
Mhm.
ball would fly off the gun, but it would be attached by a string. So then I'd stick
Mhm.
it back to the gun and I called the next guy and I'd shoot him. So at least we were even, right? Like, you
Yeah.
say no to me,
Yeah.
I'm saying no to
Uh-huh.
you. We're good.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
And so, yeah. So then eventually I ended up getting clients. Don't ask me how, but I did. And then they referred me to people. And then all of a sudden, like, that momentum built and I started to have success. And I really liked the job. Like, I liked helping people. I liked the financial strategies. I liked the concepts that we were teaching people and helping them employ. I just didn't like getting the client.
Mhm.
So
I definitely understand all of that, especially the cold calling and stuff. I don't even think people try to do that anymore. But I
no,
think
they
it's
don't allow them. Exactly.
so as you're doing this and you're making your career, at what point did you switch from the financial aspect to being your own brand, international speaker, motivate people, and then starting your own podcast?
Yeah. Well, I will say, so I hired myself out of a job so that I could stay home with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kids got into school and
Mm-hmm.
then I was kind of floundering, to be honest with you. I'm like, I'm not really loving this, but I don't know what to do. And then the car accident happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the car accident was like, whoa, 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 whoa. If my life was over, there's a lot of things I want to do and see and experience. And it just kind of gave me the courage to say, I don't care what your opinion is, society or grandma or person next door. I'm going to start doing me. And whatever that is, it is. And so I kind of got into the brand me
Mm-hmm.
as a F you to everybody else, to be honest
Mm-hmm.
with you. It was like
Yeah.
my way of like staying true to myself and owning who I was. And I got support from other people and they felt the same way of, there's more to life than what we thought, and we're going to go get it and make it and create it for ourselves. And so that kind of evolved, and then the mountaineering evolved, and the speaking, because I climbed Everest, some people wanted me to come talk about my experience, and then I loved it, right? Like I loved the exchange of the crowd and the energy and all the stories that I got to hear from the people in the audience. And then it just kind of snowballed.
Yeah. I could definitely see where that's going. So you're with your book, what are one of these strategies that you can share, so so people can get that and start enhancing their lives?
Yeah. I think one of the big things that I learned from climbing is big mountains take big teams. You know, you don't climb Everest by yourself. You have teams that manage different parts of the mountain, and then teams that manage food, and teams that manage tents and oxygen and all. Like, there is so much that goes into me climbing Everest. It's amazing. Like it's unbelievable when you really sit there and watch that whole thing happen and like come together and get people up that mountain. And I realized like how often when we're at home and we're building a business or we have this vision and we're at it alone, you can't do big things alone. Amazon has a bazillion employees because it's huge and it needs them to make it run. If you're building anything of substantial value or size, you need people on your team. So if you start running out of energy, if you start running out of like excitement about your goal, and you start compromising, like, oh, maybe I just want to do this instead of that. Instead of compromising, instead of quitting, instead of giving up, like I'm going to encourage you to stop and just ask yourself, who can help me? Who wants to be on this quest with me? And how can they help carry my load and help keep me excited? And can we play off of each other to build this thing together? And that, I think, is going to get more people to the top of their mountain than anything else.
I love it. So you being a mom of 7, having all these multitude of things that you're doing, what advice do you give to people to balance all those things?
Balance is hard, and it is this elusive thing that doesn't exist. Okay. You only have balance when you look back. You don't have, like, you're always moving, and to stay in balance, you have motion going on, to be honest with you. And sometimes things are not balanced, and then sometimes they are. So for me, when I was climbing, I would be gone for 3 weeks. But before I left for climbing, I would always try to do like a ton of intensive time with my children. So if you looked at those 2 weeks of my life, you're like, oh my gosh, all she does is hang out with these kids. She's a helicopter mom. But then if you looked out 4 weeks, you're like, oh, actually, she's gone for 2 of those weeks. So now it balances out. And so when you're looking at your calendar and you sometimes you need to zoom out because of what you're doing to give yourself the balance that you desire. And for me, like when I got into the financial service field, I had to build my book of business. I had no balance. I worked 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, maybe 3 hours on Sunday, so I could set up my next week to be as good as possible. I slaved to that job. I'm now in my 40s. I have an income that I couldn't have even imagined from that career. And I work maybe 20 hours a year, making sure everything's going good on that. So at the front end, it's not balanced. At the back end, it's not balanced. But if you spread it out, it probably is. I just front loaded that situation. So you need to be honest with yourself. Am I front loading something? Am I going to backload something? Is it going to be balanced over a period of time? And that's something we each decide for ourselves.
I like how you said it. Most people don't even look at it from that perspective. So that's definitely, I love it. I'm going to start using that. So you did your podcast, and I believe the name of that podcast. Okay, Seek Your Summit with Jenn. When you started that process, how was that for you? Because I imagine that was probably like the first time getting into the podcast arena. How did that go?
Oh my God. Oh my goodness, friends. If you want to see the most hideous podcast ever in the history of ever, you need to look at my first podcast. I mean, it is so bad. It's embarrassing. So here's the thing. I'm like online Everybody's like, oh, start a podcast. It's easy. So they're like, turn a closet into a podcast room. So I literally like empty out a closet and I'm like, oh, I'm going to order those foam things that absorb sound on Amazon. So they come like all crunched up in boxes. You have to wash them, and then you have to dry them, and then you glue them onto the wall. So I have this whole wall glued of these like black foam sound absorbers. And then it looks like I'm in a black hole. Then I set up the computer, I put lights in, and I go to do my first podcast. And the heat from the lights starts to cure the glue. And I'm getting high off of glue while I'm trying to host a meeting with some like famous person because it was just like horrible. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting lightheaded. What do I do? How many minutes are we in? Am I like listening? It was like so much. It was so bad. And I think that's all of us in the beginning of anything. Amateurs are like terrible at things. That's why we're amateurs. I'm much better than what I was, and I can laugh at who I was in the beginning because it is hilarious.
Yeah. Did you start with like an interview style, or did you just start with like your stories to build your audience?
Oh, no, I did interview style. And, like I was like that ego. I'm like, I'm gonna be good at this. Like, I'm good at talking to people. I'm gonna be good at it. So I interviewed like some famous person, like New York royalty. I'm not good at it. I was nervous. I was high on glue and everything went wrong. I almost forgot to hit record. Have you ever forgot to hit record before?
I know. Yeah. I've talked a couple of times where I'm just sitting there talking and I was like, hold on, I gotta start recording this.
No, there's a lot of things that you don't see behind a show. And like, of course we compare ourselves like to the Tim Ferrisses of the world, right? Who have like teams making this podcast happen. Again, big mountains take big teams. You want a big podcast, you need a big team that's doing all the little teeny tiny things so that you can be in your zone of genius as much as possible and not managing all the pieces.
I definitely get that. So are you still actively doing the podcast, or?
I am. It's called Seek Your Summit, and I interview people that have had success and are now turning that success into a significance, whatever that looks like for them. Super fun. I love interviewing people. I love sharing stories. So yeah, I'll be doing that for a while, I think.
Okay. So when I first started podcasting, I've been a podcast for like 7 years now. It'll be 8 in February. I started off like just doing them 3 times a week or whatever, interview style. Started running out of guests because at first it was about artists. Then I graduated to business people, just people doing great things in the community. But what I noticed over the course of time is I always had to have guests because that's how I chose to do the format. But then I was like, you know what? Let me start doing seasons, because doing it every week, or at least trying to have a guest every week and doing all the other stuff that it takes to behind the scenes to make the podcast move forward, was a lot of work. Do you do yours in seasons, or how do you do yours as far as the frequency?
I've heard of people doing seasons and I totally respect that and get it. My issue is I have so many podcasts recorded right now that I'm releasing 2 episodes a week so that I don't have podcasts record like 9 months later. Does that make sense? So somehow you get into the flow of things and people are like, hey, you should have her on your podcast, or this person or that person or that person. I said yes to everybody in the beginning. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, we just recorded 8 podcasts this week. That's 2 months worth of content. That's not a good idea. Like, we have to get these things out. So yeah, I'll probably get into seasons at some point, but right now we're trying to empty the book.
No, I definitely get that. So Jen, is there anything else that we wasn't able to cover that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, we covered a lot today, didn't we? We went all over the place. I want people to buy the book. It's so much fun. It's been my slate project. You can, if you pre-order, you're going to get a whole bunch of bonuses and things like that. So do that. Buy the book.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna let everybody know out there, make sure y'all buy the book. I'll put the link in the thing so y'all see it or whatever, for everyone who watches the video side. But Jen, thank you for your time. I know you're a busy woman and you have a lot of things going on. Plus you got 7 kids, and I understand it because I have 8. So I got you beat on 1.
What? Oh my goodness, you're the first person I've ever met that's beat me. That's amazing. Woo!
But thank you, Jen, for your time and everything. And wish you much more success on all your ventures and journeys and endeavors. And definitely would love to have you back on later to see what you're up to again.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.